In the early 2010s, I remember browsing YouTube to watch the usual countdown videos or whatever I was watching back then. Till one day I saw a video in my recommendations. It was a reading of what's called a creepypasta. I didn't know what that meant at first. Like, was this some spooky pasta? What could be creepy about pasta? But no, creepypastas are online horror stories about basically whatever the writer wanted it to be. Original works, lost episodes or versions of movies and TV shows, and what caught my interest was the gaming side of creepypastas. I specifically remember the first one I listened to. It was one on Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo's Murder if I recall, read by Mudahar of Some Ordinary Gamers back when he used to do his Haunted Gaming series, before doing whatever he does nowadays. From then on, I became a fan of creepypastas. I often listen to readings of them from Muda, Tatstop videos, and Hilton's Revenge, often in the background when I'm doing something else. Hell, even to this day, I still do it on the job. Even though many of them weren't all that good, the world you find yourself in does little to suggest you should have. Therefore, though, the inclusion of this nonchalant figure in gray, the game makes you complacent in the poisonous mindset that suburban American incubates. A modern critique, indeed, for such an early video game. This is about Paperboy 2, by the way. It can be real dumb. Today I want to look back on 10 gaming creepypastas. From the good, to the bad, to the sometimes questionable. Now, this should be very obvious, but I want to reiterate, when I'm criticizing these stories, it's not an attack on the author. This is just a simple, harmless, nostalgic dive into the past. Also, I'm not going to be reading these word for word. These are going to be more abridged retellings of the original stories. So I still suggest you should read or listen to these stories if you get the chance afterwards. So, without further ado, let's enter the bizarre world of gaming creepypastas. Nick recounts an event that had happened last month with his friend after lending him his games. The friend attempted to rip the games using a program from a torrent site he found called Shigami no Tenshin, or Four Gods in Heaven according to Google Translate. It supposedly got around the copy protection of any game and ripped them into smaller file sizes. After installing the program, the games came out as a .4 format, but when switching them to ISO files and mounting them through daemon tools, they worked flawlessly. The friend tried playing Portal 2 as a .4 to see what would happen if you tried playing via that format, but it came up with an error message in Japanese. They got the idea to switch the computer's language to Japanese to see if it would fix the issue, and it turned out it did, but now the game has changed. It showed a rundown test chamber with shells sprawled across the floor. All her limbs were at odd angles and her long folk boots were broken. Now at the title screen, GLaDOS' eye was redder and flickers of flames were seen out of sight in the background. When starting a new game, the intro was also different. A fog lingered along the floor, the picture you were supposed to stare at was just a red space, and the music that was supposed to accompany it was just static. When the friend first met Wheelie, it was more cruel and aggressive towards Shell, blatantly telling them they have brain damage. And dropping into the first test chambers, mingled bodies were scattered across the floor. They soon closed the game after that, and tried several other games to see what would happen if they were played as a .4 file. Need for Speed, Serious Sam, Civilization, and even a ripped copy of a movie called Inkheart all exhibited the same changes. Death, human sacrifice, and much more were present when they weren't originally. The friend had enough of the program and deleted all the ripped files, and while trying to delete the program itself, it played the sounds of people screaming in Japanese, displaying photos of accidents and disasters that feature people dying in gruesome ways. While this was happening, the friend had a realization that whenever something horrible happens, people just look away, trying to ignore the true horrors of the world. With all that, the friend plans to open the eyes of those who looked away, and that was the very last thing Nick heard from his friend. He was later found by the police living in a bomb shelter filled with bombs and various poisons, and was arrested for a series of violent crimes he committed the weeks prior. Nick followed the story by looking into the program in question and learned that the word Shigami in Shigami no Tenshin is a type of demon in Japanese legend, and the word Shi means four, and four in Japanese is often associated and pronounced similarly to the word death. So, it wasn't a .4 file, it was a .death file. Ooh, spooky. Honestly, as our first story, it wasn't all that great. I don't know how a simple program can have the ability to change up a game like this, or even a movie for that matter. So much that drives someone to go on a murderous spree. But I imagine Death was just secretly a programmer in his spare time and created this program to fuck with the poor souls who decided to download it. And also, I get it's an online store, you gotta stretch your disbelief on certain things, but I don't know, I don't really find throwing images of dead people and making the games slightly darker than they were all that scary. It's very cliched, and these kind of cliches we'll see throughout the rest of the video, but as our first story, I don't think it was bad. I just think it was pretty average all around. There was an incident in the Morrowind modding scene back in 2009 over a mod with the file name jvk116c.esp. It was only ever posted in smaller forums and role-playing groups, and if you were lucky enough, sent it over email or PMs. It was only available for a few days before disappearing, but for those who downloaded and installed it, it supposedly corrupted the save files of the users. A year later, a user with the mod learned that running the game and the mod through DOSBox made it work, but after leaving the starting bit of the original game, a text box would appear stating that the prophecy has been severed. Every important NPC related to the game's main quest was dead, making it unbeatable, starting in a world that seemingly was doomed to begin with. Their player was also slowly losing health over time, draining faster if they stood still for too long. If the player were to lose all their health, they learned the cause of it, and it was the figure known as the assassin. It would crawl along the floor like a spider over the body of the now dead character. It's possible to catch a glimpse of the figure in the corner of your eye, but only briefly. When nightfall, all the NPCs would go outside and stare up towards the sky, and when talking to any of them, they would only say, "Watch the sky," before resuming their normal behavior. A new NPC would be found that would give the player a new quest line, telling them to go to a dungeon that was added called the Citadel. Compared to the other dungeons in the game, the Citadel towers over all of them in both size and difficulty. If one were to make it to the end, they would arrive at what's called the Portrait Room, a room filled with portraits that always face the player and using photos taken from the user's My Pictures folder. At the end of the hall, a locked door remains. If the player were to return to the NPC that gave them the quests, the only thing they would say is, "Watch the sky." From this point on, everything told is based on a player who later got himself kicked from the board and was in contact with the narrator of the story via email. They would continue their descent into the mod to find any way to unlock the door. The solution had something to do with the night sky itself. The assassin grew more hostile over time though, screaming at the player at one point. Through several sleepless nights, the player would eventually dive into madness, dreaming of the assassin haunting them, tapping on their window in real life. They seemingly were close to finding the way to unlock the door, but after the tapping incident, they went silent. The narrator deleted his version of the mod soon after giving up hope, but now asks if anyone has a copy of it so that he can see all this for himself. I love this story, because unlike the previous story, a mod like this can exist. Hell, there's a recreation of it you can download for yourself. Bethesda games are well known for being mod friendly, and seeing a mod like this is somewhat possible. Plus, who's to say that everything in the latter half of the story was just a sleep-deprived hallucination by the one player? This story, however, remains a classic in the creepypasta scene, and still one of my favorites to this day. Our narrator's favorite character is Mega Man, and he has personally played through 2 and 8, but never the original. Sometime after the release of Mega Man 8, they went to an old video game store to try and find a copy of Super Mario World for their older brother as a moving out gift. While looking around, he found a copy of Mega Man 1, but with a torn cover and a slapped-on sticker reading Mega Man 1 written on it with black marker. When handing the game to the cashier would freak out, telling our main character to destroy the game and to not play it, or it will come after them. Not sure why the cashier didn't destroy the game themselves. Hell, why is it on the shelf if they don't want people playing it? Also, the main character just sort of leaves the store without paying for either game, so technically he committed theft? Or at least that's how it's portrayed in the story. It never said that he actually bought the games themselves. Despite the warning, they put the game in their NES and sees that all 6 of the Robot Master's portraits now have black backgrounds and glowing red eyes. They chose Cutman as their first stage. Instead of displaying the robot's name, it said, "Leave now." When loading into the stage, there were no enemies, no pits, and the music was slowed down with a lower pitch. They would encounter Cutman at the end of the stage, and before starting the battle, Cutman said, "Mega Man, get out of here, or it will catch you and take you along with it." While fighting him, yellow blobs emerged and killed Cutman, only leaving his head. Text appeared stating,
"They will all die, and so will you. No one escapes the Yellow Devil."
The player returned to the stage select screen, with Wily's castle now being the only selectable stage. Loading into the stage, the sky was blood red, and the castle itself was in disarray. When entering the castle, Wily, Dr. Light, Roll, and all the Roller Masters were on the ground, seemingly dead, covered with blood. Text appeared once again saying, "Why didn't you save us? Turn back now. It's going to kill you. You can't escape. The red eyes. The red eyes." Yellow blobs appear rapidly, forming a giant yellow being with a demonic red eye saying,
"I am the Yellow Devil. No one can escape me."
Mega Man is soon swallowed by the yellow blobs, and the Yellow Devil spat him out, now bloody and mangled. The screen went black, and the only thing on screen was a close-up of Mega Man's body with a giant red eye behind him.
"They're all dead. Now you're next. No one escapes the Yellow Devil."
The player turned off the game and ran back to the store to get some answers from the cashier, but when they arrived, everything on the store shelves were gone, and the cashier was nowhere to be seen. They head back home, destroying the game into pieces and tossing it into the trash. By the way, I don't get why creepypasta protagonists have to decide to destroy copies of supposedly haunted games. Like, if you need evidence, like, that, you're destroying perfectly good evidence there, if you say submit it to the cops or whatever. Their older brother returned home, and our MC told him about what just happened. They didn't believe him at first, but decided to comfort their little brother by offering to take them to their new house. They headed to their older brother's home. The main character dreamt they were walking up their driveway in the middle of the night, until their stomach started to hurt. They coughed up some blood, and a yellow substance. They kept vomiting out this yellow gunk, until the Yellow Devil formed right in front of them. It swallowed them whole, crushing their bones, and ripping off their skin. The Yellow Devil said to them in their final moments,
"You thought you could escape me, but you were wrong. No one escapes the Yellow Devil."
They kept repeating it until they saw their now mango body lying on the ground with a giant red eye behind them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we call a shit pasta. And you know what's funny? This was actually an earlier version of the story, and it's also the same version I remember Muda reading years ago. There is an updated version of it on the Shitpasta wiki, but from what I've seen, it's mostly the same story, just with added details. The idea, though, of making a story around the Yellow Devil isn't a bad idea. It's got the potential, and what supposedly was the first creepypasta by the author, or at least that's what it said on the page, it could have been a lot worse, to be honest. It is still filled with the typical cliches of blood and gore being everywhere, even though, thinking about it, wouldn't it be oil, or something of the like? Because again, everyone except Light and Wily are robots. Also, the player receiving the game from a strange seller, which again, was pretty dumb of them to have the game available for anyone to buy on the shelves. Like, could have just simply like tossed it in the dumpster yourself and called it a day. But no, instead you just tortured another player. Good job, cashier. While preparing to move to a new home, our protagonist came across some old CDs containing backups of files from over a decade ago. While searching through the CDs, they found one labeled Conversations with Pahn. This one CD contained a series of images, audio files, and text files between them and a user from an old messaging board they were a mod on. The user Pahn registered an account on the board, asking for help with pulling apart their NES to use its card reader on their PC to play their NES games through an emulator. Our narrator, going by Pasmerja on the board, suggested Pahn should instead just download the ROMs, but Pahn seemingly was not tech savvy. After explaining about ROMs and emulators, Pahn became a regular on the board, and the two would become friends through their interests, and being both fans of the RPG Suikoden. One night while talking about a Metroid game, Pahn brought up the Secret Worlds in Metroid 2. The Secret Worlds is a glitch in Metroid 2 that sends you out of the game's map, being made up of random tiles in different rooms. Pahn tried the glitch out and recapped everything to Pasmerja, which progressively got stranger. The music changed, garbled mashes of pixels attacked them at one point, and weird structures started to appear. Stuff that makes Pasmerja guess that it's a sort of hack. Pasmerja soon sees that the pictures Pahn sent them made out a message, and the closest thing they can get was, "How dare you? Stop stealing my legacy." Some days later, Pahn sent them a screenshot from the game stating, "Last chance to stop," and started playing some audio that they couldn't describe. Pahn said they had to answer their door real quick, but after Pasmercha listened to the audio themselves, Pahn went silent. After many days, Pahn never came back to the board, and never answered any of their messages. Pasmercha continues to analyze the audio, speeding it up and revealing that a voice is saying, "I am," and presumably their name, "Knock knock, here I am." They go from site to site to find the ROM Pahn seemingly downloaded, coming up with nothing, until they got a private message from an anonymous user saying, "Look up Gunpei Yokoi." Gunpei Yokoi was gravely influential while working at Nintendo, including working on the original Donkey Kong, Mario Bros., Kid Icarus, Metroid, and Metroid 2, with seemingly his greatest creation being the Game Boy itself. Yokoi would leave Nintendo and sadly pass away in a car accident on October 4th of 1997, the same day Pahn sent their last message. Since then, Pahn remains missing as Pasmercha moves on with their life, unsure as to what happened to Pahn, leaving their fate mystery. This is honestly one of my favorite creepypastas of all time. The mystery, the build-up, and the sheer amount of mock-up screenshot images and even audio provides authenticity to the story. The only thing that rubs me wrong about the story is using Gunpei Yokoi himself. I don't know, I think it's kind of disrespectful to use the death of a real person and make it as if their ghost is haunting whoever dares mess with their game. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. They could just simply made up a fictional character to be the ghost and not just a real person. Or hell, maybe just the game itself came to life and did the job. That's just me though. Our protagonist is fascinated by cut content, more specifically cut content from the first Halo, but they end up encountering a version that hasn't been discovered until they came across it. The original Xbox one day stopped reading discs after being dropped by accident. They went online to try and find one on sale to replace it. They searched eBay and found one for a cheap price and bought it on the spot. The seller even was a former Bungie dev according to the description. Once it arrived, they looked through the Xbox to see what was on it, hoping somehow that a E3 build of Halo 2 was on there given that it was from a former Bungie dev, but instead on the system itself there was a game labeled Halo Beta. Launching the beta, it opened the same way as the final game would, and when starting a new game on heroic difficulty, they played it as they normally would, up until they made it to Captain Keyes, and attempted to do the special event where if you killed Keyes, waves of invincible Marines would come in and gun down the Chief. But now the Marines seemingly were able to die. They continued until they made it to the end of the mission, where instead of Chief helping a fallen Marine into the escape pod, the Chief tosses a grenade into the pod, killing all the Marines on board. Much of the game's story played out mostly the same afterwards, besides now Chief being up against both the Marines and the Covenant, and also now that Keyes is dead, which was something that was never meant to happen in the final game. And now reaching the campaign mission called Keyes, Chief now plans to take control of the Truth and Reconciliation and detonate it to wipe out the Flood. Still, once reaching the hollow panel on board, Chief inserts Cortana into the ship's network, only to learn that the ship has taken too much damage, making it impossible for it to self-destruct. The Flood breached the room and attacked the Chief. He attempted to fight back, but in vain as they soon swarmed him, infecting and converting him into one of their own. The Flood not only controlling the Chief, but also Cortana and the Halo's index. Everything goes black, which leads to a loading screen to a brand new mission. A Gravemind now in control of Halo's control room, 343 Guilty Spark, the monitor of the Halo ring, and Cortana, who now appears like a ramp itself in Halo 4, the Gravemind commands her to activate Swift Space and set course for Earth. It placed down a headless combat form wearing the same armor as the Chief. The Halo ring would soon appear near Earth, and the Flood with Storm would seem to look like New Mombasa from Halo 2. Now control of the once Chief, the player was given the objective to destroy the human population, in what looks to be a very early version of the Halo 2 beta from E3. The Marines soon appeared, but they end up getting overrun. Cutting back to Cortana, the Chief flickered back to being blue, and teleported Johnson to the bridge, giving him the index. He activates the ring, wiping out all organic life before cutting to credits, with Cortana seemingly flickering in the background. The player decides to go through the game again on Legendary, as almost every game in the series has a slightly different ending if you beat it on the hardest setting. After beating the game again, it played out the same, but now during the credits, it would zoom in on Cortana till her face covered the whole screen, whispering to the player, "I see you," giggling to herself before cutting to black. They messaged the seller on eBay, with them responding asking if they found their secret yet, and saying, "Just so I don't get sued, for your eyes only. Okay. With immediately our protagonist breaking that promise by posting this story. I like this one. I like the idea of there being this alternative storyline that was cut and heavily changed during development. The likelihood of someone attaining a console from a former dev with such a build is a little far-fetched, but it's not an impossibility given the many times people seemingly have come across lost builds of old games by buying consoles off of like eBay or such. The only thing I haven't included was the opening of it, which could have been trimmed down as it goes on a bit too long about cut content and the like. But I do generally like this one, it's pretty solid all around. Tom, like many people, considered himself a big fan of the N64 game GoldenEye 007, and goes on a gaming forum to ask if there's any other games out there that are similar to it. He was suggested Perfect Dark since it was made by the same devs, but it didn't interest him. Another was the TimeSplitters series. He looked up Let's Plays of specifically TimeSplitters 2 since this was the one that interested him the most. He didn't have money to buy a copy, so he ended up logging off for the night, continued researching the games before heading off to bed. He checks the forum again and sees that now he has a private message by an anonymous user saying, "I'm willing to give you something you won't forget." The message continues with the user saying that they were sending a gift and a warning. Okay. Literally after reading the message, his doorbell rang. It was a delivery guy standing outside with a package with TimeSplitters 2 limited edition for PS2 written on it with a black Sharpie. Which, first off, how did he get his address? And second off, shouldn't this set off all the red flags as soon as some random dude online sends you a box of God knows what in it? I wouldn't open it, my dude. Tom takes it anyways and opens it to see that it's a seemingly normal copy of TimeSplitters 2 for the PS2. He looks up his PS2 and pops the game in, booting up to the main menu with Closed Beta Build 5 in the bottom left. Somehow this was a beta copy of the game, and for the most part it started the same as the final game, only looking less polished. He entered the sub-area stage, the first level of the game, and played up until he reached a new area that wasn't there before. It was a large hallway with locked cells on each side. It progressively got darker the further he traveled down it, and soldiers that were in the cells grew more desperate, begging to be let out. Some of them soon became mangled bodies, or zombies, until the screen went black entirely and the character appeared in a large room with dry blood on the wall, with surgical tools and dead bodies lying on a table. Tom finds a terminal in the corner of the room, and his character proceeds to sit in front of it. A live-action video began to play, seemingly from the 90s or so. Two surgeons were seemingly experimenting on a corpse with it cut open and its organs on display, with a machine hooked up to its heart. It suddenly awoke in a panic. Its constraints held it down, but it frantically fidgeted around, moaning and howling in pain. The surgeons put down the tools and stared into the camera, saying something in Russian, but with the screeching of the beast drowning them out. The creature broke free and grabbed both surgeons, killing them before looking into the camera. It then cut to a shot of the facility identical to the one in-game, flashy coordinates. A power surge occurred and turned off the system. After the power came back on, Tom asked his friend, who is conveniently in Russia right now, to check out these coordinates, and without even questioning it, he agrees to and heads to the location, which appears to be a dam of sorts, similar to the one in-game. The two get on a call with the friend exploring the site. He continues further, finding human skeletons in cells, and finds a similar door as in the game. He opens the door, and as soon as he enters, a loud moan is heard, and the call ends. And so does the story. I don't know, I don't think this is very good. It's just very unremarkable as a story, and very contrived given, again, Tom has a friend who's conveniently in Russia and near the exact location of those coordinates, and doesn't even bat an eye as to how he got those coordinates to begin with. Tom never explains how he got the coordinates to him. And look, if I were asked by a friend to do something like this, no matter how much I trust them, I would not go to a place that is in bumfuck nowhere. And now Tom is likely out of a friend too, since he likely died to whatever creature that was. Drama of the century right there, I'll tell you. I got nothing else to really say about this, so let's move on. Our narrator talks about the time he found a Facebook game that was advertised on his page. The game was called Super Sniper 2.0, with a picture of a sharpshooter and a tagline that they didn't remember. They were bored, so they decided to play it. It redirected them to a site for the developers, Twisted Gaming, as they call themselves. The site itself was pretty bland, with only a welcome message inviting them to participate in an online beta for their new game. which is experimenting with new technology that will propel role-playing gameplay into the next generation. They clicked on the Play Now button and the game loaded with a text screen detailing the plot, explaining that some disease broke out and converting those infected into zombie-like creatures. The player's job was to use their sniper rifle to wipe out the infected. Zooming out on one of the targets, the player notices that the target themselves are very detailed and quite realistic. They took aim and shot the woman. After noticing how realistic its movements were, it made them feel sick, so they decided to put it out of its misery. A kill cam, as the game calls it, pops up showing an image of the woman, bloody and in a white uniform. It almost looked like a photograph. After a second, the photo disappeared and the game continued. Taken to level 2, the game gave the player control of a drone flying over a lab of a terrorist organization that has created the zombie virus. They were instructed to bomb the site, and in doing so, the game brought up the kill cam, but now it's a video of a burning building with men shouting in the background. On the 3rd level, they return to the town and now one of the targets is a little girl. Disgusted at the idea of killing a child, the player decides to move on and skip the target. The next one was hiding between 2 fuel tanks. They switched to incendiary rounds and blew up the tanks with the target running away covered in flames. The kill cam was shown again, now with a char body and the 2 tanks blown up behind it. After killing another target, the player notices something that made them quit the game. All the people that he killed were wearing white suits, similar to how those motion capture suits were for movies like The Polar Express and Lord of the Rings. The following day, there was a news report about a drone strike on a building in Iran, killing several civilians in the process. And this is why they wish to remain anonymous after playing this game. A snuff game is an interesting idea for a story. It just wasn't really pushed that far. It was fairly short, but what if, say, instead of the targets being these random civilians in a village, what if it was like taking incorporation of it being a Facebook game and taking the people that's on your friends list as the targets in game? Like, take a full advantage of what a Facebook game is, like sort of the Farmville or whatever, where those games require you to invite friends to unlock in-game rewards and such. Incorporate the idea of it being a Facebook game. Or at least that's how it's portrayed as. I like the idea of it, and I think the concept can go further if, say, the author will give it another chance. According to our player, this isn't one of those haunted game stories. No ghosts, no conspiracy, no satanic messages, no bullshit. This is about a seemingly supposed secret ending to Super Mario World. When they got a computer for their birthday in 1996, our player often pirated stuff online, which is how they discovered Super Mario World. They never owned an SNES as a kid, but even after downloading loads of games for their SNES emulator, Super Mario World would remain their favorite. They would continue to play it for over a decade as a time waster, replaying it countless times, often using Game Genie to freeze the timer to explore the levels with no worries. All that changed, though, is when they encountered the Blind Boo. As the name suggests, it had no eyes and was hovering over the exit of the sunken ship level. It wouldn't chase them since it had no eyes, so it couldn't see, making exiting the level impossible. Until they noticed a key and a keyhole above the exit. They weren't there before, but when they go through the secret exit, a new path is opened. A whirlpool next to the stone Bowser, with the name being, "Oh God, no." Mario's expression changed into sheer horror upon hovering over the stage. Entering the level, it started out as any other castle level in the game, which led to a tight corridor. The blind boos started to appear above him in the blank space above. But more importantly, a giant bullet bill appeared right in front of the player, causing him to run in the opposite direction. The bullet bill had blood dripping from its eyes and mouth. The only thing the player could do to prevent his death was to use the Game Genie and turn on permanent invincibility. After letting the bullet bill chase him for a while, he turned around via the bleeding bill, as they called it, only for a message to be seen in the black space above, saying, "I hate you!" Continuing forward, giant boos started to appear. They covered their eyes like they normally would, but upon passing them, they gave chase, wearing these demented smiles so wide that you can see down their throat. Another message appeared above saying, "Why won't you die?" The player finally escaped the room, now entering an underwater segment. They soon encountered thwomps that are covered with blood. The thwomps, however, weren't any trouble thanks to the invincibility. After passing the thwomp, they enter a portion of the stage that is covered with spikes on both the top and bottom. but now dead Marios are stuck to them. The dead Marios returned to life and started targeting the players like the torpedoes would in the base game. The player knew even though they had invincibility, they didn't want to be touched by them because who knows what will happen if they were. They soon find a pipe and escape the horde. Now entering an empty corridor with nothing to kill or avoid, they press forward, only to see a giant red boss door and a mushroom with a strange face on it. And to quote the story here, I didn't touch that shit. I don't blame you. Entering the door, it led to a bridge suspended above lava like the bosses in the game, and then all of a sudden a green figure walked in from the right. It was Luigi. Out of jealousy and hatred for his brother, for quote-unquote being Mario's second banana, he plotted with Koopa, or Bowser, wherever you want to call him. He was the reason for the princess being kidnapped every time. It was an inside job plotted by Luigi as an act of revenge against Mario. Luigi gets the jump on Mario, who was still in shock by the revelation. Before Luigi could deliver the final blow, Mario got back up and overpowered his brother until he knocked him in the lava pit below, screaming out in pain. Mario just sat on the edge of the bridge, crying over the death of his once brother, until the screen faded to black, and then everything seemingly went back to normal. The whirlpool was gone, no longer accessible. Everything seemed to go back to once was. As so, the player continued to the end of the game, being the final boss, only for the final image to be different. Now here's the thing about this pasta. It's very cliched, it has the pointless blood and gore, etc, etc. But that's the point of this story, as it's meant to be a parody. So I guess if you look at it as a satire for the whole video game creepypasta thing, it's fairly accurate as a parody, I guess. Though there's plenty of effort placed into the screenshots and whatnot, which I do appreciate. It's pretty nice. And what's stranger is that this is still kind of a relevant story, thanks to the likes of Friday Night Funkin'. You got me as to why? I don't know. I never played Friday Night Funkin', and I don't get why I Hate You is a part of that. I don't know. So as a parody, I think it works. And though as a story itself, I did actually find it engaging. Even though sometimes when people say it's meant to be parody or satire, sometimes it can come off as them deflecting criticism like, oh, no, it's meant to be bad. It's supposed to be bad. Like, I don't know, that's sometimes how it comes across when people say that, but I think that's genuinely what it's meant to be. Our narrator's parents were the first to fall violently ill from a disease known as Zorax. Their mother was the first to pass, followed by their older brother who just turned 17. Then finally their own father, who they stayed by while he suffered from muscle spasms and vomiting. His pupils dilated until they became an inky black. Soon he would become very still. They would run into their room and cry to themselves, knowing that they are now alone. They would soon fall asleep though, before being awoken by a persistent knocking at their door. They soon opened it to be greeted by people covered in head to toe in protective equipment, identifying themselves as the day crew. They were ordered to line up with the surviving children and trek through the streets with the day crew, witnessing the aftermaths of all the riots and looting they only heard of, but never saw. Several members of the day crew were seen burning bodies of the victims, and the children were now ushered into trucks, driving them off into the dense forest outside of the city. After arriving at their new home, the children were instructed they were immune to the disease as it was tied to their hormone cells in their bodies, as they were too young for it to develop within them. They were ordered to be studied by the day crew to find a cure for the disease, and also given vaccinations to prevent them from going through puberty. They wouldn't be able to grow up to adulthood and have children, but they seen it as a necessary sacrifice. Weeks went by, with little progress. From their bedroom, the narrator could hear the night crew telling stories of areas that were affected by the disease. People who were forced to live by the shores with inky black pupils and scaly skin. Others mentioned pregnant women in the mountains, expecting children, and hoping to give birth to their young. The group turned the subject back to the results of the recent testing, showing promise, but it wasn't fast enough. It has now been a month since the testing, when several children talked about trailing lights in the sky that the day crew couldn't see, chalking it up as visual hallucinations. As the children lined up to get their blood drawn, one of the day crew became violently ill and started vomiting through his mask. The children were now ordered to line up for decontamination, scrubbing them with chalk-like substance, with the kids now calling them the scrubs. Many of the kids started to befriend the lights, while more news from the areas came in. The food in the mountains became contaminated, and the births resulted in defects, being born over a healthy birth weight. and their eyes being far apart. And the cure they've been working on only slow down the progress of the virus, only killing people within days instead of hours. After waking up the next day, the scrubs were gone, leaving the children behind, leaving their failed experiments behind. The children seemed unaware of their absence, though, and continued to play with their imaginary lights. Our narrator sulked back to bed in a depression, drifting in and out of sleep, having recurring nightmares over and over. When they woke up, they noticed something floating through their doorway. A ball of light descending towards them, saying, "Hello, Link. Wake up. The great Deku Tree has summoned you." Weren't expecting this to be a Zelda creepypasta, did you? Well, unless you already read the story years ago, but shut up. Zorax did blow me away the first time reading it, because the ending did feel out of nowhere. I didn't expect it to be a Zelda creepypasta. But then looking back through it, you can see the hints the writer left, like the birth weight of the children being overweight and the eyes far apart, it's the Goron. The scaly black-eyed people being the Zoras. But I guess, how does this fit into Ocarina of Time itself? Like, how does this fit? Is everything in that game a hallucination of the kids? Well, no. Sometimes you just gotta to just take a story as is. Like, it doesn't need to connect with the actual game itself. I love this story. It's one of my favorites. The imagery alone is pretty unnerving and eerie, visualizing it in my head. And I think this is probably the only real mindfuck creepypasta that genuinely surprised me, because I've read others that didn't really, but I think this is probably one of the better. Okay then, story number 10, the final story for the video. Oh, we gotta end off on something big. Like, what could we do? There's Godzilla NES? No, that's too long. Ben Drown? No, wait, I already did a Zelda creepypasta, so that wouldn't work. I don't know. Oh, fuck up. Okay, you know what Sonic.exe is. I know what Sonic.exe is. I'm pretty sure those Zoomer-ass kids know what Sonic.exe is. But I'm going to recap it anyways. Tom is a huge fan of the Sonic series, and one day received a package from his friend Kyle. It was a CD case and a note attached to it. He hadn't heard from Kyle in about 2 weeks, and the note Kyle left for him said to get rid of the disc altogether and destroy it, before whoever it is gets him too. Tom opens the case to see it's a disc with Sonic.exe written on it with black marker. Instead of just doing what Kyle said to do, he goes ahead and puts the disc into his computer and shrugs off Kyle's demand, because he's too big of a Sonic fan to pass up an idea for a Sonic game he's never played. It booted up and it was the first Sonic game for the Genesis. But for a split second, he could see that the title screen changed, with the sky darkening. The emblem was in disarray. The water turned blood red, and the Sega 1991 in the corner and turned into Sega 666. Worst of all, Sonic's eyes were now pitch black, bleeding, and had 2 glowing red pupils. All this he can describe from a split-second image, by the way, and just shrugs it off as a glitch. Alright. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but if I saw that kind of thing, I'd just rip that son of a bitch out and call it a day. But we wouldn't have a story, would we? It booted up to the Sonic 3 file select screen, showing Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Robotnik, surprisingly. He figured it may have been some sort of hack game, and as a smart gamer as he called himself, he knew he would be scared of some spooky ROM hack. Tom picked Tails since it was the only one selectable, and was sent to Hill Act 1. The once peaceful melody was played in reverse, and the only thing he can do was move forward and jump. The further he traveled through the stage, the more dead bodies of small animals appeared. He kept going until he soon saw Sonic. He wasn't responding to Tails' presence. Tails slowly walked towards Sonic, only for the sound of static to get louder, and for a split second Sonic opened his eyes to reveal the same ones from the title screen. It cut to black, and then there was text on screen, reading, Tails is now an Angel Island zone from Sonic 3, with everything on fire. He looked terrified and was pointing to the right of the screen. Tom moved Tails to the right for a while, until Sonic reappeared again, chases Tails with the drowning music playing in the background, and right up before he caught up with Tails, Sonic disappeared. Tails standing still, crying in fear, only for Sonic to reappear again and kill Tails, while he screams in terror. His blood splattered everywhere, and cut to black. Sonic then taunted Tom by saying,
"You're too slow. Want to try again?"
Taken to the file selection screen again, Tails is no longer available, and Tom continued with Knuckles, with him only to suffer the same fate.
Someone has solved the plan. Single time.
Tom decides instead of, just getting rid of the disc right then and there, just takes a nap and then has a nightmare about the evil Sonic talking to him in his dreams. Which, just take the disc out of the system, man. What the fuck is wrong with you? Robotnik was the only character left, but he ends up getting killed by Sonic like the other two. The screen goes to static, only for Sonic's face to appear in. Wait a minute. That's not the right face. Could have sworn this wasn't the right face. Where's the right face? Hold on. Oh, there it is. The screen flickered several times, with the message written above it.
Ready for round 2?
Wait, that's not Tom. The computer shut itself off, and it couldn't be turned back on. Tom tried everything he could to turn the computer on, but then he hears someone whispering behind him. He turns around to see a Sonic plushie on his bed, with bloodstains under its eyes, and in that case, I just grab the fucker and just eat his ass in the trash can. And that was Sonic.exe. It's one of the most famous creepypastas of all time, and it's also one of the most notorious as well. It's practically brimmed with many cliches again we've covered. Sonic turning evil for no reason, the pointless blood and gore, a dumbass protagonist that just didn't listen to the fucking directions his friend gave him, and cliches everywhere up the ass. But it comes off so over the top that I can't help but laugh at some of this. I won't lie though, as a kid I was scared of the story. More of the face in the original fan game. Which, I don't know, that face always scares me, even to this day. There's something genuinely unnerving about the face. Like, I don't know who made this. And also it looks like he never brushed his teeth at all. Like, Jesus man, brush your fucking teeth. But nowadays, it's more or less a joke of a story, but what makes it scarier, though, is the fact that this story, like I Hate You, is relevant to this day. Like, no shit, this story is just so relevant that even the official Sonic Twitter account referenced it. Its popularity hasn't gone away. In fact, it inspired many fan art, fan games, news stories, more mods for games like Friday Night Funkin' again, what's with this fucking game? It's a strange tale, but I can't deny the serious impact it's had not just on the creepypasta scene. The amount of high-quality fan games based around or inspired by it alone is very commendable, and sometimes there's genuinely really good projects out there by very passionate people. Like, sometimes something great can come from something pretty bad, and in this case, it came from this, and without this story, the landscape of creepypastas could have been radically different. Because after this, there are so many stories like .exe stories. It's obscene of how much there is, and I don't know, I kind of respect it for that. Just not the original author. And with that, that concludes this video. If it wasn't obvious, I love creepypastas. They're not perfect, and there are some genuinely bad ones. But even from the bad ones, there's some enjoyment to come from them. And hell, this is just scratching the surface of it. There are dozens upon dozens of stories out there. So I leave you with one question. What are some of your favorite creepypastas, good or bad? Let me know in the comments below, and maybe if I do a part 2 to this, they could appear there. But for now, I thank you for watching. Have a good day, or night, or whatever, and take care. I told you to get the fuck out!